Okay, so we're going to be looking at the paint bucket tool and the gradient fill tool. So these have many applications. It depends on the photo, it depends on what you need. So I'm just going to show you a couple of applications of what you could use this for. So in this particular image, I'm going to extract the duck first because I don't want to affect that. So I'm just going to use the object selection tool. And let's just get this guy selected. Okay, and then to lift a copy of him into another layer, Command or Control J. So you can see I now have a copy of the duck in its own layer, which means if I work on the background layer, I'm not going to be affecting him. And I'm also just going to make a duplicate of the background layer, so I'm not doing anything to the original photo. So on this background copy, the first thing I'm going to show you is using the paint bucket tool. So the paint bucket tool, just in its normal state, really just fills areas. But if you start playing around with some of the settings here, like the blending modes, opacities, and tolerance, and so on, you can get some interesting results. So let's just say that I wanted the grass in this scene to be a little bit richer and a little bit more luscious. So I'm going to change my foreground color to a green. I'm going to go for quite an extreme level of saturation, and then just using multiply as my blending mode, and then I'll set my opacity to 34 and my tolerance to 60, and I'm going to put contiguous off, which means it's going to go everywhere where there's that green and not just connected to where I click. So let's just see what that does. Okay, so just with one click, I've actually managed to really richen up that, I don't even know if that's a word, to make this more luscious and more kind of, more like a park, which is great. So that's one application for the paint bucket tool, is to apply some kind of color with a blending mode to achieve a certain result. I'm going to hide that layer, and I'll just call it paint bucket. And I'm going to make a duplicate of the original again, and let's call this gradient. Okay, so when you're working with gradients, as you will have learned that the gradient tool allows you to customize gradients. So if I click on the gradient tool and I go up here to the control panel, I can click on this little ramp to bring up the gradient editor. Now in Photoshop 2020, it's changed quite a bit. We now have these categories of gradients, and there's actually some really nice ones here. If you don't like these, or if you want to go back to the original gradients, if you just click on this little, if you cancel out of here and you go to your gradients panel, and then to the options, you'll see there's legacy gradients here. And you can add your legacy gradients, which are the original Photoshop gradients here. So that's all of these ones. And the reason why I like to do that is because they've got these photographic toning gradients here, which I use quite a lot. So I'm going to use those. So just to recap, you go to Gradients panel, Options, Legacy Gradients, and you'll add those or append them. So now, when I want to apply a gradient, if I just go and choose a photographic gradient, so I'm going to go down to Legacy Gradients and then Photographic Toning, and let me choose, I'm going to go for something like this gold color. This is called Gold 1. And then I'm going to adjust the blending mode. So I'm going to say Overlay, and let's take the opacity down a bit. Okay, and then I'm just going to drag from top to bottom, holding shift so it stays in a straight line. Okay, so that gives me an interesting result. I'm going to reverse it, so undo, so Command or Control Z, and then reverse, and then let's do that again. Okay, so I actually quite like that. So you can experiment with these photographic tonings, and you can even go for one of the newer ones. So if I go for something like, let's go for something crazy like purples. Let's go for this one, purple 21, and let's try that. I won't reverse it. Okay, so some interesting results. Of course, you can edit these gradients by clicking on the gradient ramp and going in here and changing any color you want to. So it's completely editable, and you can also save your own gradient by putting in a name here and pressing new. Okay, so that's one way of working with gradients. Another way is actually working with them more graphically. So for example, with this duck layer, let's just call it duck. If I wanted that to be a gradient instead of a photo, I could actually go to my FX panel and to gradient overlay, and then I can go in here and actually choose a gradient. Let's go for that one, and let's say I also want a background on this, so I'm going to put a background behind the duck. I'll just call it backdrop, and let's say that I wanted something else for that. Let's go for okay, I'm going crazy with colors here, but let's just say this one, and set the blend mode to normal and the opacity to 100, and then drag. So you can see that I can go completely graphic with it, or I can use it photographically to change the way a photo looks. And that's really the value of using the paint bucket and the gradient tools. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and see you next time.